I'm not an expert on assessment, I should say, and I definitely have a bias when it comes to this conversation. My background is much more in the open source communities. So large groups of people getting together and producing things collaboratively with very sophisticated quality management processes that are often poorly understood though. So from the outside it looks like it's just messy and everyone can edit Wikipedia, how do you get anything good? Well, it turns out that these communities are very good at instituting kind of a set of principles that they adhere to. Wikipedia has this very clearly articulated. And then they also police themselves and they give feedback and work together. So, but the difference is that the definition of quality can evolve much faster in open communities than it tends to evolve in large institutions like universities. So, it's a very slow process if it's happening in hierarchical systems. It's much faster if it can be bottom up. That doesn't mean lower quality, but it's just a different way of organizing quality. So for me, I think it's very, very interesting to see the example of OpenCourseWare, which MIT, which is I think now 12 years old. So 12 years ago, MIT, or don't quote me on the number, but some years ago, MIT decided to release all of its course materials, all of its syllabi, online under a Creative Commons license, so anyone would have access and could use them for non-commercial purposes. And one of the interesting benefits, which the institution does not talk about very often, is that the biggest quality increase was among the professors because they were embarrassed to have their colleagues see their course materials. And so I think this idea of openness as a driver of quality, like if you have to make things open, the world can see them, but usually you only care about a few people in the world. And if you're a university professor, the person you care about most is another university professor. Yeah. And so it was really interesting to see at MIT, the quality of the materials increased dramatically because we gave them away to the world. And so, just kind of a very interesting new way of thinking about how can you increase quality. But then, like a very different perspective on quality, I think is, well, what does quality mean in terms of the purpose of education and learning? And there, we sometimes talk about three things that we would like our students to have. The ability to reason systematically, think creatively, and work collaboratively. And there's a lot that you can unpack in those three things. But one thing is clear, those are things that are extremely difficult to measure through standardized tests or multiple choice exams, or they're very easy to observe. Right? Like if you work with a group of people, it's very clear who is a good collaborator. It's very clear who's a creative thinker. But they're very difficult to assess or test in automated systems. So I think we'll have this interesting tension where on one hand, I think the technology and the assessments are going to get better. On the other hand, we may want to reserve some space where we do rely on humans, or we do rely on communities who maybe are better at assessing them, or, yeah, as I said, I'm not an expert on assessment, but I just feel like the conversation often goes in one direction or the other, which is very kind of more and more detailed systems of assessment and competencies and rubrics, and then everything has to be checked, or no assessment at all. We're saying no to assessment, freedom of learning, and I think it has to be somewhere in the middle. We need to figure out ways to connect the two. But the thing that I always have in the back of my mind is, I think it's an Einstein quote, and I won't get the quote right, but I think he said something like, it's not always the things you can count that count, or something like this. So basically, we measure the things we can count, but the things that count, that are important, may not be the things we can measure. And so keeping that in mind, that we should get better at measuring, but maybe there's also things we can't measure, and they might also be important. So I think that's kind of, for me, that's, as an outsider to the quality discussion, I think that's how I think about it.